The aromas that we're smelling, they are subjective. Welcome to Learn Wine with Caroline. In this 4-part series, I'm going to teach you how to taste wine like a pro. Make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and go to the links in the description to find my free flavor chart and my tasting note template. In our last video, we talked about how to set up your wine tasting and how to analyze the appearance of a wine. In this video, we're going to talk about what probably is the hardest part, which is the smelling. In our next video, we're going to go into tasting and what you're getting in your mouth. And in our final video, we're going to talk about the conclusions you can draw from that and how to gain confidence in your tasting. This is the really hard part. And I know that it's hard because you don't walk around sniffing things, do you? If you do, you probably shouldn't. But I do, because it's my job. Basically, we don't navigate the world with our noses very often. It's just not the way that we talk about the world. So it can be really difficult to pick out aromas at first. It takes practice. You have to practice, you have to try it, you have to take notes, and you can't be drunk. Remember from video number 1, you can't be drunk. When we are doing our assessment of the aromas, we are going to use our flavor chart tool. So I have that in my head. I don't need one, but I have made one for you and you should check it out. The link is in the description. Basically, finding out the aromas is something that takes time and it takes practice. And once you have a bunch of different wine, you've done a lot of different tasting, it gets a lot easier. It's not impossible. You don't suck at it. You've just never done it before, okay? Give yourself a chance. So I'm working with reds right now, but for whites, you have sort of different categories of fruit. You have citrus, stone fruit like peaches and pears. You can have tropical fruits, green fruits like apples. Pears are not a stone fruit. That's peaches and apricots. Apples and pears. For red wines, we tend to really start from a place of berries or stone fruit like plums and cherries. Or sometimes I think it's helpful to start with red versus black fruit. So I have 2 wines in front of me. I always taste more than 1 wine in order to be able to create the comparison. It's a lot easier to decide which is red fruit and which is black fruit when you have 2 wines in front of you that are very different. So I always recommend that you set up at least 2 wines that are very different, especially when you're starting out tasting. Okay, so we're gonna give the first one a sniff. You always wanna swirl your wine. You can do it on the table if you're worried about spillage, or you can do it in your hand. You wanna have glasses that taper a little bit so you can swirl. So I'm gonna give it a sniff. If it's not doing much, it needs to open up, and that is just to oxygenate. You can swirl it more, you can give it a little bit of time. This is pretty aromatic, so I can get in there. It smells a little farty at first, a lot of wine does. This is definitely red fruit. It's not a super complex wine. It's a really nice wine. This is Beaujolais. It's got a little bit of a cherry vibe. Okay, getting that for a minute. Then we're gonna go on to this one, give that a sniff too. Ooh, this is very different. And this is a Chianti from Italy, so they're very, very different wines. This is still red fruit, but it has a lot more of a spiciness, and it feels riper. So the first thing we do is we're gonna talk about the fruit. That comes from the primary aromatics. So when we talk about the aromas, there are 3 levels. There's primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary aromatics come from the vineyard. These are the things that are coming from the grapes and the place. Secondary aromatics are from winemaking. These are the things that are happening in the winery. And then the tertiary aromatics are final stage. These are things that are happening after the winemaking in the cellar from age. So these have very different categories. You can see them in my flavor chart. But the first category really is mostly about fruit, also like floral stuff, vegetal things. You can find minerality, which is a really nice vague wine word. Once you get minerality, you get it though. And so those are the primary aromatics. So for both of these, we have stone fruit kind of cherry character, but there's definitely a difference in the ripeness. This Beaujolais is not as ripe as the Chianti. So even though they both have a very strong cherry vibe, the Beaujolais is more like a fresh, almost like cherry juice thing, whereas the Chianti is much more of a cooked cherry vibe, like a cherry jam. So when you do come to these sort of fruit categories, you do want to think, is it fresh? Is it ripe? Is it cooked? Is it candied? Those are the kind of descriptors you can add. And then you take notes. Yeah, you got your notebook, you take notes. Okay, for the Beauj, I'm gonna say, then from a winemaking perspective, this is really, really fresh. It has a little bit of a metallic thing. I could put that in there, but there's not that much going on here. It has not been oaked. Oak is gonna be the big flavor often that people are gonna get in the secondary aromatics category. And then this one also doesn't really have any oak. It could, but it doesn't. So I don't really need to write down anything else for that. For this one, I'm going to say it's got some spice. And this does have a little bit of like leatheriness, which can come from time. I mean, stuff like this just takes practice. The aromas that we're smelling, they are subjective. So what I smell and what you smell might be a little bit different. But what we're doing is creating a sensory memory, especially when we write things down. We're telling our brain that that smell is associated with a word. And even though we're not actually smelling real cherries, I have made the association that what I'm smelling in this wine smells like cherries. And I remember that because I've done it a lot and I've written it down, right? So it is subjective. It's not something that is cut and dry. If you smell something that someone else doesn't smell, that's fine too, but trust yourself, you know? What do you smell? And don't be afraid to also accept suggestions. If someone else is like, it smells like this, be like, oh yeah, okay. And sometimes it really makes sense. It'll be like, oh yeah, that is what it smells like. Like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc smells like passion fruit. Okay, it smells like passion fruit and mango. And you go and you smell a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc and you're gonna be like, oh yeah, that smells like passion fruit. But then you're creating that connection between your brain and your nose. But you gotta give yourself time and patience for that.